Why are we willing as a society to say that some individual has an exclusive and virtually absolute power to use, to abuse, to enjoy, to transfer something, and someone else doesn't? That's a property right, and it requires moral work. It requires us to think through a philosophy of justice that we would say makes it right, that makes it okay, that makes it morally acceptable to enforce, to protect those rights in a political order. Now, we've looked at some of the ways that in modern society we tend to think about the justification of property rights. There's a libertarian justification that places great weight on free exchange. There's a labor theory that places enormous weight on the fact that people work, they earn their labor. And there's a utilitarian justification, which says the society will be wealthier, the society will be better off ultimately, consequentially, if we protect property rights. All three of these are justifications which have some moral weight. They have some validity. They also have inherent weaknesses. But I want to introduce us to a different way of thinking about the justification of property rights, and that's Aristotle's, because Aristotle's explanation of property rights is so characteristic of Aristotle's way of thinking about political problems that it can serve as an entry into his political philosophy more broadly. Aristotle's political philosophy, we might say, is a kind of naturalist philosophy. We'll explore Aristotle in more detail in future lessons, but Aristotle was a naturalist. In fact, he's a great observer of nature. He was a practicing marine biologist for part of his career, and he uses nature to provide grounds of justification for institutions like property. Aristotle says property is natural, and it's a different way, fundamentally a different way to ground the justification of property rights. Now, Aristotle says that in fact human society is natural. Aristotle says the association, the state in which humans live is natural. Aristotle says that humans don't live in a state of nature. Aristotle says humans don't live in some pre-political condition. There is no way for humans to live outside of association. That is, humans naturally live in communities. He says the first community is the family, and he says this is natural. Humans have to live together to reproduce. It's biological. There isn't any way for humans to be fully human without living in family. He says that families, moreover, naturally band together into villages for self-sufficiency, for trade, for economic well-being. And he says that villages naturally band together into the city-state, the polis, which for Aristotle is the primary unit of communal life. And Aristotle says that humans live in the polis by nature. And he says, and probably his most famous quote is, "Man is a political animal." And in fact, what he means by that isn't the way it's sometimes used today to say that humans love politics and they stay up all night watching MSNBC and Fox News. Aristotle means by that we are political creatures. We're unlike any other animal in that we are by nature meant to live together in communities. Aristotle says humans have speech and they have moral reason. And he says, think about it. No other animal is endowed with those natural capabilities. Human beings are. We are built by nature to live in the polis. So we are a politikon zoon. We are a creature, an animal that lives in the polis by nature. So Aristotle too says that property is natural. He says other animals have their own kind of property. A hawk that dives down and scoops up a mouse has the mouse as its property. It's natural for the functioning, for the well-being of the hawk. He says it's the same way with humans, that we need property to survive naturally. Now, Aristotle is willing to allow that nature is the grounds of property. But Aristotle's philosophy also has a fundamental concept that is rooted in the Greek word telos, purpose, aim, end. When we say teleological, which is a fancy word you'll sometimes see, it means based on the end that something should become. Aristotle says that things by nature have a telos. That is, that things naturally have a purpose. They naturally have some end or aim. He says that the purpose of a little acorn is to grow into a giant oak tree. And he says human beings too have a telos. They have an end. They have a purpose. And Aristotle, a concept that we'll explore in much greater detail, says that the purpose of being a human is to flourish. Eudaimonia. It's a beautiful Greek word that's difficult to translate. You'll sometimes see it translated as happiness, but happiness is an ice cream cone in English. It's not rich enough. It's not deep enough. You'll sometimes see eudaimonia translated as well-being, but that almost connotes too much simple bodily health. The only way truly to translate eudaimonia into English is flourishing. It's a rich enough, broad enough, evocative enough word that it means something like what Aristotle means by eudaimonia. Now, Aristotle's philosophy is grounded on the idea that humans naturally have a purpose, and that natural purpose is to flourish. Now, we'll talk about what that means in greater detail. It means to live a life of excellence in accordance with one's reason. But for Aristotle, this is the purpose of life, and property is necessary for humans to flourish. Aristotle, in fact, says that humans can't flourish without property. Aristotle says that it's their natural end, their natural aim to flourish, to live a life of excellence in accordance with reason, and that they can't do that without private property. Aristotle therefore says that property is a good thing. But this has an interesting implication. Aristotle says that property is natural and that it's good, but that it's not the highest good. He says property is an instrumental good. It's an intermediate good. Property is only good because it promotes human flourishing. Aristotle thinks that property is natural and good, and that private property rights can be justified. But the important consequence of his justification is that it's only justified insofar as it promotes human flourishing. That, in a sense, would both justify and potentially limit the extent and weight of property rights.